Hello, good morning. I'm happy that you're here to join us today. Today, we're going to be talking about allowable costs and award expenditures, and just get a deeper dive understanding of what those may look like as you're working on your grant or contract or sponsored funded programs. So, welcome. Next slide. All right, and today I will be presenting, and Vanessa from Collaborative Partners Initiative. We'd love to get to know who's here with us today. So we're just going to take a few minutes to say welcome and do introductions and get to know one another. So I'll, lead this off. My name is Angela Silva, and in this lane, I've started in award management and was managing grant-funded projects for nonprofit organizations over my last 15 years of doing this work. So very familiar with, oh my gosh, how am I supposed to all make this happen and account for these expenditures over a period of time? So excited to share what I've learned and what our team brings forward. And one thing I'd love to learn today is just what folks would like to take away from this presentation. I'd love to hear about challenges or things that you're thinking about or have worked on or not sure of, and just bring those questions forward. So always happy to entertain questions and do some brainstorming around issues related to grants or contracts. And I'll popcorn it to Vanessa.
Hi, my name is Vanessa Quiroz. I'm also with Collaborative Partners Initiative, and I have been with CPIN since September. But I do have experience in grants and contracts. It's actually kind of funny. I started working on grant award management when I was 19. Started reconciling faculty budgets when they had grants. So I've actually been doing that ever since. It's been a very long time. I prefer not to say how many years. But this is definitely something that I enjoy. And I really like also putting together presentations with Angela and helping other organizations learn what I love to do.
And Hannah, would you like to go next?
Sure. I'm Hannah. I'm the program director at Heart Strides Therapeutic Horsemanship in Olympia, Washington. One thing I would like to learn today, I think, is just kind of a fresh perspective or new ways of looking at these things that pertain to grants. I feel I've talked with Danielle one-on-one. I feel like I'm kind of like in a little rut. Like things are working, but I know that there could be ways to improve. So that's why I've been hopping on to all of these that I can.
Thanks, Hannah. So glad you're here. And we may, as we go through the slides, just, ask questions. If you'd like to bring things forward, please do, because we want this to not be an intimidating process, but just a learning opportunity and for us as well. So next slide. All right, so we're going to review several areas related to allowable costs and award administration today. So we're going to talk about the funding cycle. It's all related, from thinking about getting the money to getting the money to, oh my gosh, we have the money, managing that, and then closing out the program. So this is all related, all good work. We'll talk about getting started with the budget, even in the award phase, when you are thinking about, what is that grant award going to look like, or even the proposal phase, what is that future grant award going to look like? It's all related, and we're going to talk about getting started with the budget. Cost share. We touched on this in our last presentation, but we're really going to, send a reminder to folks here, reviewing this presentation, because we want to make sure that folks understand what cost share requirements and commitments are. And then we'll talk about cost principles, award expenditures, and budget considerations. And we're going to bring this in from the federal level as well, because that's always a good bar to set for yourself, like, very clear guidance in that arena. And if you are following federal guidelines in your organization and not even having federal grants, it's still best practice. So we recommend being familiar with that, because it's good learning tools for other awards you may be managing. All right, next slide. All right, the funding cycle. So we've touched on these in our different presentations, but this is, the funding cycle and how this is related to today's presentation. We really want to talk about thinking about the budget as you're developing the proposal, and that is going to be in most cases, a scored part of the proposal. The numbers should match the words, so to speak, and help you fulfill the program. And then we'll talk about why the budget's important when you're negotiating the award and when you're managing and reporting, and even close out, accounting for those budget to actual expenditures is very important in the management and life cycle of an award. All right, next slide. All right, so getting started from the budget, perspective, even when you're preparing a grant proposal, it's very important to understand what the funder or the funding organization is looking for. So we encourage anyone that is reviewing the grant eligibility requirements or the funding announcement to really sit with that document for a while, highlight and mark up areas, especially when it talks about the budget. This document will tell you if the budget needs to be line itemed out, specific categories, if it just needs to be a total cost, if a sponsor is requiring cost share, if indirect costs are allowed, all those things. So it's a very informative, document. We call that the roadmap to success in your grant proposal. So depending on what proposal you might be putting together, the budget should reflect the work that you're doing. So your budget should be relevant to the costs proposed. And if their sponsor is looking or the funding agency is looking for a budget that is line itemed out, then that would mean, any staff costs would be an item, any supply costs would be an item, any consultant costs would be an item, travel, etc. So think of that and making sure you're putting full costs in your budget. For staff costs, one of the things we wanted to point out here is oftentimes we see the staff line of a budget not really fully thought out as far as what you can capture in staff costs. So staff costs are usually salaries and wages. So if your staff is paid an hourly rate or if it's a salaried position, you should include the relative amount of hours or work that you're thinking that person will do over the life of your project. So get those salary costs in there. In some cases, if it's a multi-year project, also think of, if somebody's going to get a raise or cost of living adjustment, adjust for inflation, those should be captured. And then also taxes, you want to be including FICA. It's usually 7.65% of, per hour, basically. And then also any other benefits. So if you're offering health benefits, retirement benefits, supplemental benefits, there's usually a percentage that those benefits will cost per individual. Those could also be captured in the staff salary and wage line. Ensure that you are also budgeting costs to support the work. So understand what it's going to take to do the work that you're wanting to do. So if you're doing outreach, do you have enough people to do that? Are you accounting for any social media or outreach or marketing costs? Are you accounting for travel for people to go from one place to another? Outreach at a farmer's market, right? How are they going to get from point A to point B? That travel for work is allowable at the IRS mileage rate, local mileage rate. And also think about any partners or subcontracted costs. It's always good in the proposal phase to get those estimates from whoever you might be working with, so you can really have a budget that's going to be true to the costs that you anticipate incurring. Programmatic costs, I mentioned that just a minute ago. Those would be anything required to do the work. So as you think through your scope of work, are there any costs that you haven't thought of that you might need to incorporate into the budget? The funding announcement will let you know what is an allowable cost. If you don't see this mentioned, any programmatic costs or anything that they won't fund, write it in. Only you know what is required to do your work. If you're not sure at the cost of some of those items, we always encourage people to go out and use the power of Google or contacting vendors directly to get an estimate of costs, so you would understand what those costs may be for your project. If there are indirect costs allowed, the funding announcement will mention that. Some organizations always include a percentage of indirect costs in their budgets. Some organizations have an indirect cost rate. If folks don't know, typical sponsors will allow typically a 10% indirect costs, which are basically just a calculation of the programmatic direct costs above, and the salary and wage costs. So we can always send a budget template to you or walk folks through in our technical assistance if you have questions on how to do this, but don't overlook that. It's not going to make your organization be in a stronger position if you don't include indirect costs. Some budgets also allow, instead of indirect costs, or in lieu of, an administrative cost line. So think of, HR or administrative positions, or sometimes it could be rent or utilities or internet or other costs in that bucket. So if they do want you to budget out administrative costs, think of what that would be and how the project relates to that category. You shouldn't put all your rent into that budget because, again, the grant is only one part of your scope of work for your organization, but usually a percentage of those costs is allowable in that category. And food for thought, it's not just good to throw numbers at paper and turn it in with a grant. So make sure you're not padding the budget and that you have a true cost. Eventually, the sponsor may ask you to detail out how you're going to spend the money once awarded. So you definitely want to make sure your budget is true to costs and not padded, so you can give them that insight into how you got the calculations. All right. Anything to add there, Vanessa?
No, I think that's at least getting started. Yeah.
All right. See, so much to think about. All right. Next slide. All right. So this is from the perspective of when you're managing a grant. So you've got the grant, it's amazing. Things to think about in the grant management phase is go back to the beginning. We ask folks, the grant management role, and this might be the same person. You might have written a proposal and now you're managing the grant, but you want to go back again to review the funding announcement, any sponsor guidelines, so funder guidelines, the proposal that was submitted, and the approved budget. Also look for any sponsor rules and expectations. Again, set up a file, highlight things that you need to refer back to. Sometimes we pull them out of the document and create a separate, a management document to highlight the points we need to remember. And then know your costs and needs in your approved budget. Again, line item out, are they, in the right category? Have you under budgeted or over budgeted? Sometimes, in the award management phase, time has passed and you'll need to make sure that you have accounted for everything and it's still a true costs. And also in this phase, if you find that you may have under or over budgeted or there's a gap missing, some sponsors may let you go back and renegotiate the budget with them. It doesn't mean that you'll get additional money, but it does mean that you can align the budget to the work ahead. And also set up a budget worksheet to track budgeted versus actual expenditures. One thing that we're offering during this program is technical assistance with a certified public accountant to set this up. And so in that hour with Sharif, who's on our team here, he can really help kind of walk you through that exercise and sets a tool up for your organization to manage budget to actual expenditures for all types of grants or awards. All right, anything to add here, Vanessa?
No. Good.
All right, next slide. Oh, great, wonderful. So we are probably just need to go back maybe a slide or two, Danielle. Let's see. Okay, wonderful. Next slide. Sorry, I got lost. It's me. All right, cost share. So cost share, just wanted to kind of touch on cost share and matching. So sometimes in a funding announcement or when you're reviewing the grant requirements, it will name cost share or matching or in-kind services. So sometimes a funder will only partially fund a program. And in that case, they may say, okay, we're going to give you $50,000, but we expect you to put in another $50,000 of your either money or services to make sure that we have a $100,000 program. So if that's the case and your organization is interested in pursuing this opportunity, the thing is to ask, how are you able to cover the gap in cost share? Do you need to provide money? So you have money that is not committed to another grant that you can use, or is it volunteer time or staff time that the organization pays for but doesn't charge back to the grant? The other thing is, can your organization meet these cost share requirements? So it's very attractive for organizations to go seek additional funding, but some organizations will not even go after anything that's required for cost share, because sometimes it puts an unnecessary burden on the organization. So make sure you understand what you're signing up for and that you can meet those requirements. Also, in some cases, a funder may say you can request an exemption, like if the cost share would be a hardship to your organization, you can request an exemption to this requirement, but it may not be granted, right? So again, just tread cautiously if there's any cost share matching or in-kind service requirements. Anything to add there, Vanessa?
Yes, if cost share is a requirement, it is part of the award. You'll see it written out in the agreement. This absolutely has to be tracked. Just as closely as you would track the grant funds that you're spending, you need to also track the cost share dollars to match that award. So I would definitely say, if you do have cost share, be sure to set up a program that will track all of those dollars and make sure that they're separate. You'll notice when cost share is required, as Angela said, you can't use another grant to act as the cost share on grant A. So that didn't come out right. If grant A has cost share, you can't use grant B to be that cost share. A lot of times it has to be a non-grant source of money. So just be very cautious. So don't volunteer cost share, only address it if it's mandatory and written into that agreement.
Thanks, Vanessa. That's true. Next slide. All right. Managing budget to actual expenditures, again, is a great way to stay on track. As Vanessa just mentioned, if you have a cost share requirement, that needs to be tracked as well. So set up another column in that spreadsheet if that's what you're using, but make sure you know how you're getting that number or that dollar value. Excel is a great tool. So if you're just starting out and like, oh my gosh, we don't have any funds to invest in a program, Microsoft 365 Online offers free templates. Feel free to download one and customize it to your organization. This is something we can also help you tailor in a one-on-one technical assistance. And Smartsheet is a reasonable cloud-based option that you can use. It's very Excel-like, but it also tracks timelines and milestones related to budget. So that's one of a great tool for bringing that project management approach to the work. So if you'd like to schedule a meeting, with the technical assistance for this program, feel free to visit Calendly. We can also send that out as part of the emails for this program. And I believe Hannah may have already signed up for many of these. So thank you, Hannah, for talking with folks. We love it to answer questions and provide knowledge and help organizations create that sustainability in this area. All right, next slide. All right, I'll pause here and let Vanessa do the next series of slides. I know she loves talking about numbers, so I don't want her to feel left out as we go into this next set.
No worries. So two major categories when you're looking at funding sources or funding types. You have direct costs, which is the dollars that are directly related to the project or program that you're running. You buy, well, we'll talk about a number of things. So indirect costs are the costs that you need in order to run your organization, but they are not directly applicable to the project or the grant. For example, a direct cost would be you're running a tutoring program and you need to buy supplies, paper, pencils to help students learn. The indirect cost would be you need electricity. You have the student, you need electricity, you need a facility, you need space, you need a number of different things, but you can't say that 2% of the electricity is allocable to the grant. So it's your direct costs. You can actually say where it belongs and what program it belongs to. Indirect cost is it's the cost of doing business, but you can't specifically point your finger on it and say that it belongs to my tutoring program or it belongs to my homeless intervention program. It's the costs for you to run your facility. And we can talk a little bit more as we go on, and you can see examples of what those are. But basically, your grant is direct costs and then indirect costs. And know that all of your indirect costs in some cases may not be covered by a program. So that's probably where you'll have to find other sources of funds. Okay. Angela, anything else?
No, that's perfect.
Next slide. Now, when we're looking at grants and spending grant dollars, the federal government has basically told us these are what we have to look at when we're spending dollars. They're called the cost principles. And they are allowable, allocable, reasonable, and consistently treated. And basically what that means is when you're looking at spending money on something, you look at it and say, okay, I'm going to buy this product, or I'm going to buy these pencils. Is it allowable on this grant? And the award terms and conditions and the sponsor are going to tell you what is allowable and what is not allowable. So you're going to have something to refer back to. But anytime you spend dollars, you ask yourself, is this an allowable item? Yes or no? The next step is it allocable? Which means, does it belong there? Yes, you can buy it. The sponsor doesn't say you can't, but does it really belong to that program? So that's another question. It's, can I buy it? Is it allowable? Does it belong there? The other is reasonable. And this one sometimes is my favorite. Does a prudent person think that expense belongs to that program? And also the cost. Does a prudent person look at that expense and think that is a reasonable cost? For example, you're working on a homelessness program. You want to buy a hammer. So you put in your budget, 20 hammers, $8 a hammer. Sounds about right. You put in your budget, 20 hammers, $200 a hammer. Probably not accurate, and you're going to have to take a look at it. So we just want to know, would a reasonable person, a prudent person look at this and say, yeah, that makes sense. The last one, and this one definitely, I know, is always a conversation piece. Is this expense consistently treated by your organization? And that can be difficult. It's a lot harder when you don't have what Angela had talked about, a federally negotiated indirect cost agreement. If you don't have one of those, this can be difficult because what this says is that you treat costs similarly. For example, office supplies. A lot of organizations allow office supplies to be direct charged. A lot do not. The reason being, office supplies, you can't always specifically say those supplies belong to the tutoring program. That ream of paper belongs to the tutoring program. You can't always say that because a lot of times office supplies are general. Anybody can come in and take your pencils. Anybody can come in and print paper. So consistently treated means those office supplies, your organization either treats them as a direct cost to directly be charged to the grant, or they're considered an indirect cost, where that's just a cost of doing business. So you have to accept that you're purchasing your office supplies. And this one can be difficult and it can be tricky. I don't know how many conversations I've been involved in over the last, who knows how many years about the definition of consistently treated and those different types of even salaries or supplies or even equipment. So this one, I would definitely say, if in doubt, ask questions. Always ask your sponsor if you're not exactly certain, because that one actually can be difficult for many people on how to get that one sorted out. But just remember the cost principles anytime you're going to spend money. Is it an allowable expense? Is it allocable? Does it belong there? Is it a reasonable expense? And does my organization treat this expense the same way across the board? Anything else, Angela?
That's perfect. Thank you.
Okay, next slide. Some of the things we're going to talk about, we do have a number of items to go through, but a sample budget, what it may look like is you'll have salaries, you'll have your fringe, you may have rent, you may have utilities. Rent and utilities sometimes are considered an indirect cost, but we'll talk about that. Same with office supplies, telephone, internet, transportation, accounting services, legal services. These all can be part of a budget. And one of the things I've learned after the years and years of being involved in grants and contracts is no matter what expense you have, you may always have to ask yourself, or you may always get the response of, can I purchase this? Well, it depends. And it may depend on a number of things. So just keep in mind, I would always say, keep track of your award, keep track of your expenses, and when in doubt, ask questions. Next slide. Oh, I think we can, this is kind of the same thing. I think we can skip that one. Okay, so what we're going to talk about are different types of expenses. And one thing, again, that I kind of want to put this out there is any type of expense that we're probably talking about could have it depends on if it's an allowable cost, because it really depends on your sponsor. And it really depends on your program. I actually have been in a situation where I have 2 different awards from the exact same sponsor, but what's allowable on award A is not allowable on award B. So you have to be very careful and keep track of what your program has as allowable expenses. Some of them will absolutely say your professional services, your consultants are allowable. For example, there's a service that needs to be provided that your staff can't perform. So perhaps you have a consultant come in 6-10 hours a year just to help assess your programs. That could be an allowable expense. Your marketing, maybe perhaps your website or your social media. Depending on the program, that may be allowable. You need to advertise for your tutoring program. Well, then that could be an allowable expense. But you can't market, say, perhaps for your agency as a whole. But if you had this tutoring program under a sponsor, then that could be considered an allowable expense. The same with accounting services or attorney services. If it's part of the announcement that the sponsor has put out, or it's included in your proposal, professional services can actually be an allowable expense and definitely help your program meet its goals. Angela, anything else?
This is great, Vanessa. And also when you are including professional services in a budget, it's always good practice to get a quote, sometimes for more than one, individual or company, just so you have the best price and, that you can, if the funder asks, you can justify how you got to this number. So thank you, Vanessa.
Very true. Thank you. Next slide. Materials and project supplies. So again, everything you charge has an it depends, or refer back to the sponsor, or refer back to the award. Again, for certain things, office supplies, your telephones, your computers, your postage, in certain situations, these would be 100% allowable. For another award, they may be considered indirect costs, and therefore you can't direct charge. But a lot of programs, if you have a tutoring program, you're going to need your office supplies. You're going to need your telephones. You're going to need these items. And as long as, again, it's written in the award, then it could be an allowable cost. I used to know someone, they had a program and it had gone on for 10 years. What she would do with all of the office supplies and postage and everything she purchased for that program, she literally had it in a locked cabinet. It had keys. And if you wanted to take something out of there, you had to ask her for the keys and tell her that it was exactly for that program, because she wanted to make sure that her general office supplies and her program supplies were meeting the expectations of the sponsor. So she definitely had control of that. But again, you just want to make sure when you're purchasing these items that you're documenting what it's for. For example, your office supplies, if it's just for that program, I would write on the receipt, Vanessa purchased this on May 4th for math tutoring program. And then that's our backup documentation when we're invoicing the sponsor for our funds. Any other items here, Angela?
No, that's perfect. I love that story too. I mean, what a great way to take seriously the
Yeah.
why do you need this?
You couldn't touch that cabinet unless you got her permission and the keys. The next one is, depending on your program, you can purchase equipment. And there's capital equipment and non-capital equipment. Capital equipment basically is something that has a life expectancy of more than 1 year and costs more than $5,000 and is a single item. Years and years and years and years ago, a computer was considered a capital project because, it was over $5,000. Now, you don't see this very much unless, of course, you have a specific program or a specific service you're providing where you're going to be purchasing high value items. Another thing to remember is equipment, and this one does kind of get confusing sometimes. If you are building something, you are going to build a piece of equipment, but you are spending, $100 here and $500 there and $1,000 there. But by the time you put everything together into one piece of equipment, that value will be more than $5,000. Then all of those little items that you're buying would be considered capital equipment, because once it's put together, it's going to have that more than $5,000 value. And there's some institutions that their threshold for capital equipment may be lower, but the federal government has this $5,000 cap. So I've been noticing over the last few years that organizations have been increasing what their capital definition is. The last institution I was at, just I think 4 years ago, they went from a $2,000 equipment threshold to a $5,000 equipment threshold, so they could get rid of that difference between federal government and them. Also, with capital equipment, a lot of times there is an expectation that it be inventoried. And the reason why you want it to be inventoried is because depending on the award, that equipment may belong to you because you purchased it through the grant, or that equipment may still belong to the sponsor, depending on how it's written. So they're going to want to make sure that you're tracking that piece of equipment and you know where it is, even down to location. I've seen inventories done. They want to know what room it's in, how long it's been there, if you've moved it in the last 6 months. So you just need to track. You just need to track the equipment. Also, because when the program ends, if you no longer need this position after the program ends, you also need to know how to get rid of the equipment if you no longer need it. Or if you're going to keep it, that's completely different. But you just need to make sure that you have an inventory log for this type of equipment. Anything else, Angela?
No, and I think, well, maybe just an aside, sometimes, what we've seen with a lot of nonprofit groups, it could be a vehicle, what they're using to, for direct client outreach, or taking people to appointments, etc. So it's very important to also, if you have a piece of equipment, what we didn't put in here is to make sure it's run smoothly. So sometimes regular maintenance is required, or you might need to insure that a piece of equipment, so to speak, or capital purchase. So again, that prudent person, just think of like, Aunt Martha and how she would treat her prized van. So the same thing with things that are part of your, your budget, your program, etc. You want to take them in the same light. So thank you, Vanessa. This has been fun.
I like the Aunt Martha. You're right. How is she going to treat her car, huh? Next slide. The next one is, and this one can have multiple definitions, non-capital equipment. All that means is it's a tangible item. It's something you can touch that is less than $5,000 or underneath what your capital equipment threshold is. Some organizations may consider non-capital equipment supplies. So just keep that in mind. It all depends on your financial system and how you have that set up and how you've set up your processes. And this one's going to have a few caveats. So equipment sometimes are your laptops, sometimes are printers, cameras, telephones, cell phones, filing cabinets, anything you need to set up your office. It could be your office chairs, your desks. That's all of your non-capital equipment. And this one I say kind of, again, with the caveat of it depends. Shelving, bookshelves, cubicle walls, carpets, lockers, those would be non-capital equipment. Unless it is built into your building. If you just have a carpet laying on the floor, that's non-capital. Once you have that carpet fully installed, it's no longer non-capital. That becomes capital equipment. Bookshelves, same thing. If you just buy a bookshelf from Target, that's non-capital, that's a supply. But once you have a full bookshelving system and it's built into your facility, then that becomes capital. Same thing with anything else, lockers, any equipment that's built into sinks. Had one organization that needed to install a sink for some reason that I can't remember right now. But as soon as that sink became a part of the building, then, even though you purchased it for, $600, it then became capital because it was part of the facility now. So I would definitely ask questions when it comes to non-capital equipment, just to make sure you know where your sponsor wants those to fit. And then, of course, make sure that it fits with your financial system on how you're going to be tracking those expenditures. But this one, definitely non-capital equipment, you definitely want to kind of do a double check to make sure you're putting those in the correct categories. Angela, anything else?
It's great. And I think, oftentimes, grants, you may not be asking for these items, but this is one of those, tricky areas, as Vanessa referenced. Make sure that you understand the intent and, the liability, et cetera, for this, and continue to track these items for their projects. So great way to go into detail. Thank you, Vanessa.
Next slide. So this one, I feel like I'm saying it depends every time we have a slide. These ones are just generally what are considered unallowable. Alcohol is definitely across the board. I think definitely an unallowable. Entertainment, a lot of times you'll see, organizations maybe want to buy baseball tickets. Well, that's not something you can charge to the grant 99% of the time. First class airfare is out, fundraising, gifts, lobbying, advertising most of the time is out, again, unless it's specifically part of your program. Meals also generally are not an allowable expense. Same, like I said, office supplies, generally not an allowable expense, unless, of course, it's part of the program. You've put it in your proposal and the sponsor has accepted that. Another one I just want to point out, interest and fines. Those are definitely considered unallowable. For example, you purchase 3 new printers on the organization's credit card. Someone forgot to pay the bill. You now have interest charges on that credit card. The printers can be charged to the grant, but that interest in a lot of situations cannot. The same thing if you're penalized or you're fined by an organization or an entity, those can't be charged to the grant. Other types of things, let me see, I can't think of any other unallowable item. Sometimes is unallowable. They want you to go economy, unless of course you have specific approval to perhaps get business class. But again, a lot of these, the sponsor is going to tell you what is allowable and what is unallowable. But from our experience, these are a number of items that most sponsors won't allow it to be direct charged. Angela, anything else?
That's great, Vanessa. Thank you.
Okay. Next slide. So here's a question. Oops. Okay, well, we can do this one. Mobile tutoring program. Let's say the budget is salaries. Then, oops, they're shifting. Okay. Okay. So you have, they keep moving. Okay, hold on.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure why it's doing that.
Okay.
Do you want me to keep it on this slide? And
yeah, let's just do, so you have an employment services program. You were funded to help individuals gain skills in order to find jobs. Your budget is salaries and benefits for trainers. They've agreed to pay your rent. They've agreed to pay for your telephones, your office supplies, and even accounting services because you don't have a financial person. Now, all of a sudden, you have an employee come to you and say, okay, I've purchased all of our office supplies, but I want you to pay my mileage because I had to travel, 15 miles away. You would ask yourself, is the mileage allowable expense on the grant? Any guesses? I would say no, it's not allowable. So then you won't have to go and is it allocable? Is it reasonable or is it consistently applied? But when you're looking at an expense, go through those 4 cost principles. But yes, I agree with you. I would not think that this would be allowable. Another example, you have a mobile tutoring program. I say mobile tutoring program. Your approved categories are salaries, benefits, office supplies, telecommunications, and rental fees. Do you think cell phones would be an allowable expense? I would think so too. You have a mobile tutoring program. You need to go to different places. You need to be able to contact your students. I would absolutely say that those cell phones are allowable. The next question is, would it be allocable to that program? And yes, because you can have that direct correlation, and that some organizations may, they'll 100% charge these types of cell phones, but maybe they lock them up at the end of the day. So the tutors come in, they pick them up at 9 a.m. and then they bring them back at the end of the day and lock them back up. So they're only used for the tutoring program. Then, are cell phones reasonable? Again, absolutely. The tutors need to be able to get a hold of their students. The students need to be able to get a hold of the tutors, and it's a mobile program. And then is it consistently applied? And again, that would depend on your organization. But are you considering them a direct charge to the grant, or are you considering them an indirect? For this purpose and this program, altogether, we're assuming they're direct charged. And another example I have, you have an after-school meal program. Your allowable costs are salaries, benefits, office supplies, food service supplies, and the organization wants to know if their tax services would be allowable on this. Thoughts? Yeah, we would probably say no on this one because they're very specific for what the program is. Then you wouldn't have to look at allocable, reasonable, or consistently applied. But these are definitely things when you're looking at an expenditure. I still ask myself sometimes when I'm looking at something, it's like, is this an allowable? Yes, but is it allocable? Maybe not. So just ask yourself those 4 questions. Angela, anything else to add to those?
I was thinking an acronym, the ARC method, I think while we were talking about these examples and applying what we reviewed in the cost principles, it's always a good practice for any program that you're managing, right? And then what this does as you're managing the program, it avoids any questions at the end or during when you're invoicing of having to explain why something may have happened. And so I think, just applying ARC, so to speak, as Vanessa shared with us, is a really good practice to just work in the day-to-day. Thank you.
I think that's it. I think the next one is just if you have any questions.
Wonderful. Lots of questions. Let's go. Hannah.
Not sure if I have very formulated questions, but I'm just like looking back over this. I guess our biggest thing is probably kind of going back to the direct and indirect and trying to figure out, we are trying to kind of redo a budget to have a bigger over idea of what the organization needs to survive and thrive. But I have nothing to compare it to, I guess, because so we utilize horses in our programs. We have to have a special facility. We have to have our specially trained horses. And with the horses comes the necessary, feed and veterinary care. And like, we go back and forth of like, is this an indirect or a direct cost because we can't do the programs without the horses? So then I get really hung up on things like that. Oh, you're muted, Vanessa.
Yeah, that one. I would see, and as an outsider, not knowing anything other than you have horses that perform a duty or a responsibility, I would think vet costs and food would be an indirect cost. That's something that is needed to care for the animals, but that's not necessarily like, you can't say that their food, hay, and what they eat, you can't say what specifically that is benefiting.
Like a specific day of the program or something like that.
Or a specific student, a specific person. I'm assuming is it kind of like horses can provide like health benefits?
Yeah, we do equine assisted peer support, so a lot of like mental health and recovery support for youth and veterans.
Yeah, see, I couldn't see how the food or the vet services would directly relate to one of the students or one of the individuals you're helping.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
that's kind of what I would look at. Angela, thoughts?
Yeah, so I think, Hannah, so a couple of things there. So again, like you could talk with, Vanessa and I in our technical assistants or the CPA, but a couple recommendations. So our CPA, and like I said, we could help with this as well, but you could need to have an operating budget. So that's the organizational budget. A line item in that budget is typically grants, like where does grant funding fall in, and then other ways that you might receive money. And it also lists your expenses, your staff, et cetera. So I think because we're talking about, the horses are a really key part of the programs you deliver, I think we may be able to come up with an allocation method similar to what we might be able to do, what we do with other organizations when they have utility or rent or everything. What we're trying to figure out is what portion of the costs relate to the program. And in this allocation method, we can figure out if you have a horse and this horse is supporting 5 grants, how do we divvy up that horse time, the food, the veterinary costs, et cetera. Now, whether it falls under direct costs or indirect costs, I think we have to tease those costs out a little bit differently. But I do think with the allocation calculation that we might be able to definitely, for some of your projects, justify that this is, we want to try to get it in the direct cost bucket as much as possible. Like without the horse therapy or the equine, relationship with the kids or the veterans, the program just wouldn't work, right? So I think we can consider this as like not an intervention, but a way to make the program viable as far as a method or tactic. And so I do think that Vanessa and I can probably, and along with our CPA, come up with a way to set the tone for that. So when you're going after future grants, you can say, yep, this is a cost in this category, and this is why. So here's the rationale. And having thought it through at that level would really kind of help sponsors be like, okay, I get an understanding of that. And then you'll have an idea of like consistent treatment of costs as well, whether, sometimes it's this or sometimes it's that. You can kind of really see what it typically falls in and I think that would help you. So we would love to kind of get our hands into this and kind of help figure out how those costs align. And then we'll also get you a better understanding in your operational budget of what it costs to do business. Like, what is the cost of doing business and caring for the animals and having the facility? And so that's always good awareness to know what you have to do when you're planning your budget year after year.
Absolutely. That helps a lot. And I think that's why, like you said, it can be teased out to say we can't do the programs without the horses, but it's causing me a headache because I go down too many wormholes of like
Yeah.
trying to figure out
Yes,
how it all
yes.
connects. But yeah, definitely. I think I need to sign up with the two of you so we can go over
Yeah.
this in more detail because we have a lot of questions.
Perfect. And we can even have longer blocks of time if needed, because it might take, talking with you and then drafting some ideas and a back and forth, and then able to come up with, something that you're really comfortable with. So definitely sign up with us. We're offering those hours through the 19th of this month. So we're excited to do this. We love creative situations. It's like the story problems you had in school in real life, and you're like, oh, okay, let's do it.
Absolutely. Yeah. We were just talking yesterday, trying to go back to, we're hoping to approach one of our contractors later this year for our 2024 budget. And we realized we hadn't had an increase since we got the contract in 2017. I'm like, there's a lot that's changed since then. So I just want to have all of our ducks in a row to be able to approach them and have the rationale to show why.
I know. And that most organizations don't go back to their sponsors or funders with that rationale. And the more you can advocate for your organization, the more often they'll say yes. Like if you leave it up to the funder and just say pretty please, they'll probably say no. And so I think this is just a great way to provide clarity into operations for the organization, but also, like I said, advocate for your work and say, this is what the cost of doing business for us. And we provide this great benefit. And of course, you can't get this anywhere else. So, like I said, it just helps them respect the work that you bring to the table and your organization as well. So I'm glad that you're here to kind of bring those questions forward.
Thank you.
Any other questions, Hannah, or thoughts on your mind?
I mean, a lot, but they might be better suited for one-on-one.
Okay, no worries. Please schedule those. And we're happy to be presenting next week. And our session next week, we'll kick it off with internal controls. And so just to put a seed, a planter in that for you, what does that mean? That means like a little bit of checks and balances, right? And so if, for example, if an executive director is also the accountant, is also the person doing the work, and also the person negotiating the contracts, and there's not enough separation of duties, that person can do all those things well, and it puts that person at a risk of potential conflict of interest. So we're going to be talking about putting internal controls in place. It's especially important when award management, tracking finances, doing invoicing, audits, etc., to have those separation of duties and that clear delineation of tasks and role descriptions. So hope folks can join us for that one. And that will be a 90-minute session. We're excited to dive in.
I will
All
be
right.
there.
All right. Thanks, Hannah. Yay.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. And thank you everyone else for seeing this in the future. We hope this was helpful. Have a good day.